Hello and welcome to Session 2, Episode 7 of CX Behind the Scenes. I'm your host, Karl Charisse, and I'm thrilled to have you with us today. We have a particularly exciting show ahead, but first, a few items to cover. First of all, we began this series back in December of 2022, and this is our 20th episode. If you've missed any of the previous episodes, they're all available on the Question Pro website. All you need to do is go to questionpro.com, scroll down to Experience Behind the Scenes, and you'll find them all there. Now, typically we hold these webcasts on the third Tuesday of every month, but today we're meeting, as we did last month, on the fourth Tuesday, just to keep you confused. I run a small consulting and training business called Horizon CX, and we partner with Question Pro. And our main offering is the CX Pro training program, an online hands-on course focused on the fundamentals of customer experience management. And this program helps individuals master the basics of customer experience through training and exercise and a final exam, which upon passage earns participants the CX Pro certification. Some of you on this call here today will have gone through that course. To date, over 160 people have been trained and certified. The course covers key customer experience management skills that complement and augment technology, helping create those desired business outcomes. Technology alone isn't enough. Knowing how to apply and leverage the technology is crucial, and that's the goal of the CX Pro program. And additionally, there's a companion book out titled CX Pro, A Practical Guide for the New Customer Experience Manager. And it's available on Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and other online book sources. And incidentally, a second book called Beyond the Basics, Advanced Insights for Customer Experience Professionals is about to be released next month. So be on the lookout for that. And incidentally, one of the chapters in that book happens to be on our topic today, and that is storytelling. This month's webcast, this monthly, this one, as well as all the rest of them, help to aim you advance in your CX knowledge and your career. So we encourage you to engage in the conversation by submitting your questions in the chat, because we always like to make these sessions interactive. Also, to help improve future episodes, we'd love to hear your thoughts. As CX professionals, we all know how important feedback is, and so we want to make sure that the time you invest in participating in these monthly CXBS episodes is worth your time. A short 3-minute survey will be sent to you later this week that is quick, easy, and your responses will be held in the strictest confidence. And with that, I'd like to turn the program over momentarily to Mr. Nick McFarland to give us a brief introduction to Question Pro for the folks on this session who are maybe not familiar with Question Pro.
Thank you, Karl. Yeah, hi everyone. Nick McFarland, the CX lead in Europe for Question Pro. So Question Pro is the founder-owned and led experience management platform. We have a range of products across market research, customer experience, and employee experience. Specifically in the CX space, we have a really well thought out end-to-end solution encompassing customer journey mapping, feedback collection, dashboarding and analytics, and action tracking, all in a way where it integrates neatly with each other. So you can have actions from your journeys in your action tracking, insights from your surveys in your journeys, and all of that sort of good stuff. So we like to think that we offer a great solution in the CX space, and you can learn more about that at questionpro.com. Back to you, Karl.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Thank you for that. And as we do in every one of our episodes, before we get started, we run a poll that's related to the topic of the day, which today focuses on the art of storytelling and how that can be extremely effective in the management of customer experience. So, Paulina, can we run that poll right now?
Sure. Let's go. Okay.
There we go.
So I'm gonna be sharing the link over here.
So you can do it using the QR code if you like. or with the link, whichever you prefer. Well, it looks like we got a bunch of people coming in here. That's great.
Yeah, see a lot of familiar names there. Hey, Crystal. Hi, Danny. Hi, Mark. Okay, so start question.
Here's the
And
question.
the question is, how often do you use storytelling in your daily customer experience CX work? Never, rarely, sometimes, often, always. So we got 8 answers already, and here's how the results are looking live. Sometimes it's winning, often with 46. Oh, they're same percentage here. Someone is missing to vote here, but yeah, and sometimes one. Okay, that's honest. That's legit. There we go.
So there's a few always here. I get a couple of nevers,
but no rarely.
No rarelys, but it seems like sometimes and often when we're up there, about 80%, sometimes and often, which is pretty encouraging. So that should make for a good discussion here. Great, thank you. My special guest speaker today is Alan Porter. I guess I should call you Dr. Alan Porter, shouldn't I? Isn't it, Doctor?
Thank you, but no, it isn't.
It isn't. Oh, I just gave you a promotion.
I'll take an honorary PhD from you, Karl. How about that?
Alan is primarily a storyteller with close to 40 fiction and nonfiction book publishing credits and hundreds of magazine articles. And I happened to look that up. In fact, one of your books called Before They Were Beatles was particularly intriguing to me, and I've yet to get that, and I want to get that and read that book, because that looks like a great one. Being a musician and musical enthusiast, that one really caught my eye. But there's a whole bunch of other ones there too. He has held senior leadership roles in content operations, product marketing, and customer experience. Alan was named one of the top 25 content strategy influencers and a digital strategy thought leader. He's the founder and chief content officer of The Content Pool and empowers brands to create exceptional customer experiences by leveraging their greatest asset, the content. Alan, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Karl, and thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate that. So, given that the content, right, that's what's the greatest hidden asset. There's something that came to me recently. It was a statistic that said 80% of data, we all collect data as customer experience professionals, 80% of that data is unstructured, which gives a huge opportunity to look for those underlying stories within the content of that unstructured data. So let's begin with a question here right out of the chute here. How do we get at that? How do we effectively get at that? If it's such an effective tool to customer experience management, how do we get at this? I have a million questions, but I'll probably wrap to one here. But because I'm thinking to myself, how does one become a storyteller? Maybe a little bit of background in your book writing led you into this in a more customer experience sense here, but I'm kind of interested in that. I think of myself as a storyteller because I have an ability to tell a story. How effective I am at that, I'm not really sure. How good I could be at that. So let's talk a little bit about how do we get there.
Okay. I'll answer the thing around data first, and then perhaps we'll get into my backstory a bit. I actually wrote about this recently because I'm going to tell a story. The thing is with, if you think about data without context really is just numbers. I actually just wrote an article with that exact headline, that data without context really just becomes numbers. It's nothing that you understand. So we were just talking before we went on air. I've just moved from one state to another. So I had to take out a new car insurance, and the new car insurance company gave me one of those wonderful apps for your phone that tracks your driving. So, and if you're a nice driver, you get a nice big discount. I was looking at it the other week after I had come back from a business trip, and it had actually tracked the movement of my phone when the plane I was on landed at Dallas Airport. So I actually had a nice trip. The data was saying that basically I'd driven at 125 miles an hour down the runway at DFW Airport. But it didn't track that it was an airport. It basically said my phone had moved at 125 mile an hour, therefore it dinged me for a high speed. Because I picked up my phone while I was doing that, it also dinged me for distracted driving. According to the data, that's what I was doing. But that's completely wrong, because there was no context around that data as to where I actually was and what I was doing at the time. And I think that's one of the dangers that we have if all we do is focus on data, is we miss the stories around why we're generating the data we are. And a lot of the data that we generate is about past actions. And if we just focus on that, we tend to miss the stories of why people are doing what they're doing. You know, if you just count the number of clicks, why are we getting that number of clicks? I had a client who was in the online financial industry, and they were really proud of the fact that they'd actually on one of their self-service pages that the amount of time that people spent on their page had dropped like about 40%, and they were really happy around that. So I actually sat down and tried to do what it said to do on that page, and I will tell you, it was so badly written and so frustrating that I can understand why the time on page dropped. It was because people were getting fed up and leaving. They weren't solving the problem, but all they were measuring was the time on page. They weren't actually measuring the effectiveness of the content or understanding what people were doing when they were on that page. They were missing that story. So again, you know, how do we get at the data? The data is there. I think the question is, how do we get at the stories that inform that data and understand the data? Because if you don't get at those stories, you don't start understanding the context in which the data is being collected, then all you've got is a bunch of numbers that actually don't help you understand what the customer experience actually is. So, you know, I always try, when I'm working with clients, always try and talk to them about the fact that how do we get it and understand those stories? It's the most simple thing, but so few companies do it. It's actually go out and talk to your customers and find out why they're doing what they're doing. And so often that the people who need that in customer experience, customer support, technical documentation, anybody who's creating customer-facing roles, customer-facing apps, are usually siloed away from the customers. It's usually, the only person who can talk to a customer is a sales guy, or the only person who can talk to a customer is a person on the help desk. And they have their own metrics to meet, which are not around collecting those stories. So long-winded way of answering your question, how do we get to it? We actually talk to our customers, and then we find out what those numbers that we are collecting actually mean. Because, as I've just given you with two examples, the raw numbers, if you're not understanding the context around them, can tell you a completely wrong story if we start making assumptions about what they are actually reflecting. So, and just sort of to answer your question, how did I really sort of get into storytelling around CX? It partly was because of writing, you know, fiction and non-fiction, and doing research. I will tell you, you mentioned the Beatles book. That's a history that is full of assumptions that people actually know what happened. There are so many wrong stories, and unfortunately, the worst culprits of that are the four guys in the band themselves, because there has been so much myth built around them that's then been repeated back to them that they tell it as if it's truth. But if you go back to the original sources, they're wrong. That didn't happen, but they've been told it so many times themselves that they begin to believe it. So it was part of, you know, working on stuff like that, and then writing fiction as well. I started to realize that these ideas of storytelling and stuff really help. And really what triggered my real focus on, I want to really focus on storytelling around CX, was a negative CX experience. Again, I'm going to tell another story. Was several years ago, the company I was then working for, we had a group of, I don't know, probably 20 of us that lived in Austin, Texas. We all worked remotely, so there was no office in Austin, but we had about 20 people that lived in Austin, Texas at the time. So once a month, we would get together for dinner just to keep, that interpersonal relationship going and talk about what was happening in the company and what we were working on and all that good stuff. One evening, we were at one of these things and somebody said, "Oh, I'm not going to make the all hands meeting tomorrow. I've got to go to the toll office to sort out a problem with my toll tag on my car." And literally, there's probably 8, 9 of us around the table, and everybody around the table went, "Oh, do I have a story about dealing with the toll people?" And we went round, and every story was negative. And I sat there and I thought, what happens if we can take this storytelling and flip it through 180 degrees, where you, instead of a bunch of your customers sitting around telling stories about how bad you are, how can we actually work in a way that a bunch of our customers may be sitting in a bar and talk about how good we are and how we help them, and how do we understand their pain, and how do we understand how we can address that through the customer experience that actually resonates with them and they have empathy with them. So that's sort of how I got to it. Was around a bunch of margaritas and tacos in Austin, and then thinking, well, that was a fun example, but it was a wrong example. How can we take that and make it into a positive example?
It seems when I ask people to share, when people come through my training course and I'll ask them to share a customer experience story, it usually is on the negative. It's hardly ever on the positive.
Well, I was going to say, I actually start every one of my workshops with actually deliberately asking I deliberately say, tell me who one of your favorite brands is that you like engaging with, and then tell me why it's one of your favorite brands. And it usually comes down to help or security or feeling of community or something like that. But I always start that. I literally start my 2-day workshops. That's the first question I ask is, as you're introducing yourself, tell me about one of your favorite brands and why it's a favorite brand. And that way it gets people's heads into the mind instead of immediately going to oh, I don't like that brand because X. It's like, I like this brand because they do this, they do that. And then the question becomes, well, if they do that, why don't you do that?
Yeah.
And that opens up a lot of very interesting discussions over the next couple of days.
Well, there you go. So that's a good takeaway that I just got right now. So maybe I'll reframe the way I ask that question to my students in class, because it's, in fact, years ago, I was exposed to a technique called synectics, which is a creative problem-solving technique. And one of the things that they did in there was, when faced with any problem or something adverse happened, first thing to do is try to name 3 good things about that. And you can almost always think of something negative and what's good about that. Like, it's raining today. Well, what's one good thing about that? Well, it's watering the plants outside.
Right.
It's cleaning my car. I don't have to go through the car wash.
Yeah.
And if I walk out, maybe I'll get clean too. I don't know. But, then if there's a negative aspect of that, you put it in the form of, how could we work with or overcome that? Yeah. You're putting the negative in a positive. How do we approach that and make that better? So I like those techniques. So take us from the storytelling of, your work in writing books and stuff like that, which, of course, I really like that idea of what you just said a little bit ago about the things that weren't true about, the Beatles, because they were the worst offenders in telling the story that made everybody believe this is what we want to believe, and so I know that lately, because there's 2 remaining members of that band, have been kind of more frank, shall we say, lately about some of the realities that happened within the group. So now we're starting to see some of the realities, and it wasn't the Beatlemania, the Fab Four that we always thought it was. But think about that in the context of many other things that we read, or many other things that we're led to believe. It's that context around that story. So let me ask this question here. Can anyone become an effective storyteller? I mean, think of all the different people in the world of customer experience. And I know we're all data obsessed. We love numbers, and we're oriented, and our organizations are number driven. They're financially driven. They love numbers. How do we break out of that mold and get into a more storytelling mode?
That's actually too good. So on an individual level, if you're talking about a CX professional, somebody working in the profession, coming up through the profession, getting educated in the profession, one of the things that I always like to tell people to do is actually just be observant. Is, can anybody be a storyteller? To an extent, yes. It's like any skill. It's about developing a skill. It's about practice. It's about just keeping on top of it. And one of the best ways is really to just be observant. I mean, when I started writing fiction, one of the best things that somebody taught me was just to keep a notebook and pick a person, be somewhere, the airport, on a tube, an underground train, or at the mall or something, and just sit down and pick a person out of the crowd. It's not being sort of you're not stalking them, but just pick a person out of the crowd and think about, why is that person there? What are they doing? And just make up a story about, the guy in the black jacket. You don't have to actually know who the individual is, but why is that guy in the black jacket here? Why is he wearing a long trench coat when everybody else is in t-shirts? There's a story there. Just make something up, start thinking about it. But it's about being observant. And like I said about the data, when you're looking at data, it's about, if you start being observant about life and you start being observant about things around you, you start to be able to see trends in data that actually help provide some of that context. And the other thing is to be the annoying person who asks why. Yeah, the numbers come up, but it's like, so why are the numbers like that? Why are our customers doing like, why are they all leaving our page after 30 seconds? Is it because we got great content, or is it because we got bad content? Don't just take the data at face value. So yeah, I've always been one of those people who asks, that question. And again, just going on the writing thing, the basic things of journalism, the 5 W's, why does something happen? What happened? Why did it happen? Where did it happen? When did it happen? Ask those questions. And if you create a piece of content that doesn't answer those 5 why questions, go back and look at your content and say, is anybody actually going to relate to this? Because it's not answering some of the basic questions that when people want information, they want to know, what something is, when they should do it, why they should do it, how they should do it. That's not a W, but you get the point, is that they, if you're not addressing some of those basic questions, you're not telling a story that is actually going to resonate and engage the audience, because they're not going to be, it's not going to be empathetic. Then you're not going to give the impression that you actually understand what it is that they're trying to do and what it is that the problems that they're trying to solve. And unfortunately, most companies tend to think, this is a well-worn phrase, but they tend to think inside out. They tend to think about what they do. One of my good friends in the content marketing world, Robert Rose, who helps strategies for the Content Marketing Institute, has this great phrase that, marketing is about telling the world how great we are. Good content marketing is about showing how good we are. I think that's the point we have to take, is we have to show that we understand who our customers are. We have to show that we understand their issues. We have to show how we can help them solve them. And we can show that we understand the context, one of my favorite words, show the context of what it is that they're actually trying to do and the context within which they're working. So,
yeah. Let me pose this question here, because I'm thinking, again, going back to my reference point when I worked in corporate as a customer experience manager. Leadership was always looking for numbers, especially financially driven organizations, and didn't seem to have much patience for lengthy words or stories or anything like that. So there's a little balance going on here. It's because I'm able to craft a story in the right way, given some data that I've collected here. How do I make that best approach, especially leadership in an organization with that? Because you're an attention span.
It's a very good point. And what I usually advise here is actually learn the language of the people you're reporting to. Don't report it in your language. Okay. So a lot of the folks I deal with who come in maybe out of a technical background or even a data-driven background will, when they're talking to senior management, will basically report in terms of technical stuff. And the senior management don't care about that. You're right. What they care about is dollars. So what you could do is actually tell a story in terms of the dollars. It might be that it helps the customers in one way, but that actually has a financial impact on the company. And maybe that's the story that you need to dig into and find out. The amount of content companies that I go and content groups that I start with, and I talk to the person who runs content, and I'm like, how much does it cost you to create a piece of content? And I will tell you 95% of the time, they have no idea. And it's like, well, if you're actually wanting to be going somewhere and getting a higher budget to do what you do, you need to know the financials behind it. And if you can say we can leverage customer stories in a way and find out what our customers are doing so we can get them better engaged and maybe we can sell some more product. I'm going to tell you another story. Let me give you an example. A company I worked for was involved in the construction industry. And we decided that we were redesigning the website and we were redesigning the messaging. And we did what I said earlier. We actually went out onto a lot of the job sites and talked to job site managers. And it's like, okay, given what you do, about how often in, say, a week or a month would you actually access the sort of information that was on our website? And it was like, probably 8 times in a week. And we were like, so what were those 8 points? And then it was like, okay, if we can provide content before and after one of those contact points that helps you, that 8 contact points went up to, what's that, 24 contact points in that time, which actually increased engagement, which actually increased the number of spares for the equipment that we sold, which had a financial impact. So we started telling better stories that got better engagement from the customers, which meant that they spent more money, which meant we could go to the financial people or our boss or the CFO and say, hey, look, we can generate X amount of extra revenue if you give us this money to develop the website in a particular way and more content in a particular way. So again, it's learning to tell. They always say, one of the best things about, the first things when you learn about writing is write for your audience. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you just have to tell the story in a different way with a different outcome for a different audience. And that might be for the customer, this is how we help you. For the technical person, that might be, this is why this version of the product is great. And for the financial person, it might be, this is the financial impact of actually doing this and making our customers happier. Does that make sense?
Yes, it certainly does. You know what I was thinking too, as you were talking, there's stories that come from customers. So we extract intelligence out of that, the stories that come from customers that we can tell internally in the organization. And then there's the internal stories that we tell to the organization itself to make CX more compelling. So how do you think of those two? Which has more leverage, do you think? The stories that come from the external or the stories that we craft internally to promote our cause internally?
I always think it's stuff that comes from outside. They always say a prophet in his own land is never listened to. So I think if you can come from outside, but come from outside from two sources, one from your customers or your prospects. But actually, the stories that your competitors tell, look at the stories that your competitors tell. That's actually also a good way of getting extra funding is, hey, we're doing this, but they're doing Y, and look at what's happening over there. So, look at the stories that they tell, look at the stories that come from your customers. The problem with doing internal storytelling, you should do it. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. But what tends to happen is everybody is completely focused on what their functional role is. They're rewarded on what their functional role is. So they tend not to have as much interest in what the guy over the other side of on the cubicle on the other side of the floor is doing, unless it actually directly impacts their work, unfortunately. But if you can start linking those customer stories, hey, if the guys in invoicing made things better, then that's easier for the delivery guys, and it's maybe it makes it easier for the customer to actually use the product, and it makes it easier to support, and all of a sudden you've actually got a nice cohesive story going. But that always has a lot more resonance if it actually comes from a customer, or, like I said, actually the competitor or an industry. And you talked earlier about how do we sort of find these ideas and stories, or how do we get the data, and how do you become a storyteller? And I said about looking around. I always suggest that you also look outside your own industry. Look at what other industries are doing. And I will tell you, retail is the best. We're all somebody's customers in a retail environment. We all have customer stories, good and bad, about dealing with retail brands. Look at how they operate. Look at the stories they tell. And as I said, look at the brands that you're happy to deal with, and think, well, if they're doing that, why can't we do that? And look around you as to what's going on in the broader world, and that can really help inform your storytelling too.
Yeah. You know, one other seemingly untapped internal source of stories are frontline people, because they have the direct contact with the customer, and you can often draw customer stories from those folks as well.
Oh, everybody has a favorite customer story, and you should really, you know, even if it's just sitting, it doesn't have to be a formal process too. I mean, it could be, you know, just get together at lunchtime, or in the bar in the evening, or, you know, if you've got some sort of retreat, just, you know, sit down with those people and ask them about their good stories and customer stories, and you'll get them.
There you go. The pub is the perfect place for stories.
The pub or the bar is the perfect place. Yeah, or the lunch table. Just to give I will give you another example. When I was at the construction company I mentioned, myself and my team, we made it, it's going to sound silly, but we made it known that every Thursday lunchtime we would be in Buffalo Wild Wings.
Okay.
And anybody was welcome to join us. And some people, sometimes there was, you know, and not everybody it wasn't compulsory for the team either. It was just, there would always be at least two of us. But sometimes, you know, we'd end up with 12, 15 people around the table, and we'd get some great stories from people just over lunch, you know, sharing some wings and chatting. But the thing is, we made that sort of informal channel that people could come in and share stories. And it proved to be very effective.
All right, so thank you. We've got a bunch of questions coming in here from the audience. So here, Jeff Hughes asks, how can we leverage customer storytelling to not only highlight success stories, but to identify and address customer pain points along their journey?
Totally understand. That's a great question. I think it really is around, like I said, talking to the customers, understanding the data, and starting to realize that there's a pain point. I don't know how many times I've been in a CX environment where there's an issue or somebody, and if anybody ever says, oh, lots of people ask that question, you've got a pain point, okay? Yep. You should be capturing that. Or, you know, oh, yeah, that doesn't work, so we've created this workaround. You've got a pain point. So that's the sort of stuff that, you know, you can use customer storytelling to highlight that internally, that, you know, we're getting, let's throw data in there, you know, 70% of the people who call in are having a particular problem. My wife actually just had something with one of her credit cards, and she was like, that's it, I'm going to cancel this credit card. And she called them last night, and second choice on the menu was, do you want to cancel your credit card? And it's like, we looked at each other and we're like, they know they've got a problem with this policy change they've just made. And instead of making it difficult for you, they've actually made it really easy for you to respond to that problem, which actually was a pretty good thing. It made us make that second thought. It's like, okay, they're actually responding to the fact that they know they have a problem, and they're making it easy for the customer to resolve that problem. Probably not in a good way.
Yeah.
But, you know, they identified they've got a problem. So, yeah, you've just got to listen, talk to people, you know. And
it's not just...
And spot those patterns. It's around pattern matching, and spot those patterns in the story, spot those patterns in the data, and then report those patterns or build responses around those. And you can turn a pain point very much into a positive, which obviously that credit card company was trying to do. I'm not sure they did it in the right way, but they were responding to that. So.
Yeah, in the world of systems thinking, which I'm also engaged in here, there's a thing that we call patterns. Is something that's happened 3 or more times.
Right.
And just like the credit card thing, and I'll go to my favorite ice cream place, and I'll say something. Do you have strawberry rhubarb ice cream? And they'll say, we don't. But Don, we get so many.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And I'm like, there's an so it's not a pain point necessarily. It's an opportunity.
It's a missed opportunity. Oh yeah, that's my other one. Yeah, the same one. It's everybody asks for that. Well, if everybody asks for it, you've got an opportunity to fulfill that need.
So Nick has a question here. Nick, do you want to ask your question? Nick, are you there?
I've lost you. It wasn't so much as a question as a comment back on the sort of reinforcing positive messages in CX. And it's a little story again when I was running a CX program for Sky TV over here in the UK, but for a new business we'd set up in Spain. And we had all this insight coming in. I was the one that was pushing, what are the actions we need to take? What are the things we need to change? My boss at the time said, it's all great, but you need to maybe think about how you're not just the negative guy, because everybody will see you as like, oh, he just comes with problems that other people need to fix, right? So took that to heart a little bit, and it was right. We were looking for problems to fix. We weren't looking about what are our customers loving and what are they celebrating about what we do well. So we flipped a bit of the model on the conversational analytics, and we were looking for some of these happier, more celebratory things, and then we're able to tell stories around that, and it changed the perspective of the work we were doing as well. Yeah. Like internally in the organization, because suddenly they were sort of thinking, they're not just bringing us stuff to fix, they're also telling us the good stuff and telling story. We got people to send in photos and all sorts. It became this great feel good moment that you could do. But I thought it was really interesting how early that came up. And in a CX role, I think sometimes, we do get labeled as just the fixers, but celebrating the good is super important there. So it's just an observation. Thanks, Karl.
Well, thanks.
And it's an interesting point about getting labeled as the fixers, because when you're in a customer support role or a customer facing role, that's how you tend to be seen as the repository for customer problems. Because to be honest, most of the time that a customer reaches out to a company, it's because they've got an issue. They very rarely call you up to say your product's great, it's working as expected. I don't have any. They're not going to take the time out of their day to say I don't have any problems. They're going to take time out of their day to say I've got a problem.
True, but they do tell you an awful lot around the sides of that.
But they do,
if you guys are good. So
yeah. But once you get into that conversation, you can find out. They must have been happy in the first place to buy your product. You must have been solving, or at least there was the promise to solve an issue for them to actually engage with you in the first place. So there's positivity there that you can lean into and find those stories. You're right. And just one of my friends, ex-military guy, told me a great way that he was trained in the military was what he called a disappointment sandwich, which is whenever there was a problem or somebody did something wrong, you start the conversation with a really thing about, oh, you did this great thing. That was really good. But we should address this issue. And then on the way out, but by the way, the other thing that you're doing, I think is also going to be really good. And it was like that sort of bad news sandwich. It was good news, bad news, good news way of sort of messaging things around, anything that was slightly negative, which I thought was an interesting model to use.
Yeah, that is interesting. So we have another question here. Carla is asking, what are the top 3 differences in storytelling for B2B versus B2C customer experience, and the impact on how you personalize the story for individuals?
Okay, I'm going to give 2 different answers here, and this is actually one of my favorite topics. I believe there is no such thing as B2B or B2C. Stop thinking in those terms, because all business relationships is P2P. It's person to person. Whether it's a business selling to a business, it's a person in a business selling to another person in a business. It may be a group of people who have to make a decision, but at the end of the day, it's all about relationships. I will tell you, one of the best sales guys I've ever worked with are guys who build relationships. It's all business is about relationships. It's about networking. It's about contacts. working in publishing and writing books. How do you get a book deal? How do you get an agent? How do you do that? You network, you find people, you build relationships. It's the same in business. If, like I say, whether it's working in the construction industry, with the construction industry, whether it's an equipment manufacturer selling to a construction company, that's a sales guy selling to a site manager. It's always P2P. Same with retail, B2C. It's all about that. Right down to the guy on the register checking you out. Down to the surly guy at the DMV this morning getting my license for me because I'd moved state, who couldn't have been less interested. It was still a person-to-person interaction. So
that's such an insight. I'm just going to say that's such an insight that I'm thinking now, because I talk about B2B and B2C, and you're right. You're only dealing with usually one person at a time. So even if it is a B2B situation and there's 5 people involved, you're dealing with this one now and that one later and this one later in the process. It's still, just as you say, person to person. I like that frame. So I'm sorry to interrupt. So
No, that's great. The more people who get that, the better. So to me, there is no real difference in storytelling from B2B to B2C, because it's all person to person. What it is you have to understand the need of the person that you're dealing with. What is it that drives them? And this comes back to what I said earlier on about different story outcomes, framing the story slightly differently for whoever you're delivering the message to. But if there's a difference, it's in terms of understanding who that person you're dealing is and what's important to them. What keeps them up at night? What's the problem they're trying to solve? And this comes down to the personalization. Don't deliver generic messages that don't apply to anybody. Understand the issues that people are trying to address and deliver messages that relate to them. And again, I just said everything's person to person, but I don't think trying to personalize everything down to an individual works. It doesn't scale. We don't have systems that can scale to that level. I think the best companies are the one who give the impression of personalization. What they will do is provide messaging that relates to a group of people with a common interest or a common problem to solve. And when they read that, they're like, oh, that's me. It's actually you and maybe 100,000 other people, but it feels like it's addressed to you because it's addressing the problem that you've got, or it's addressing the interest that you've got, or it's addressing the point of view that you've got. So again, companies that are like, oh, we're going to personalize down to the absolute individual level, you're never going to get there. You're never going to scale. You're not going to have the systems to do that. Pick groups. You use groups with a common problem or a common interest and message them in a way that resonates. Tell stories that resonate to those groups, and it will feel like personalized.
Yeah, it will. It's like the concept of personas in customer journey mapping, right? Personas, not person, but personas. Oh, those are
yeah, you're going to get me on one of my other set boxes here. I have a real issue with personas, but that's probably a whole other podcast.
Okay. We got another question in here. Warren is asking, what are best practices for compelling story with insights and data? What are the best practices?
Like I actually said, is ask the questions. Why? What is the data trying to tell me?
Is that you mentioned, I think, the 5 W's before, but I think we talked in terms of the 6 W's, and Paulina asked that question too, the 6 W's framework. Yeah. Does that answer the question?
Sort of. 6 W's framework for, is the 5 W's from the journalism school plus an extra one that I added. So that I teach in my workshop. But basically it's around asking those questions. The who, what are we trying to do? Who's it for? Why is it doing? And I'm showing my ignorance here because I actually don't have my slide up in front of me, and I can't remember the actual 6 W's off the top of my head, which is a horrible thing to say.
Why?
Yeah, and then I have a double what. I have a double what in it. It basically is, what problem are we trying to solve? So who, what, when, where, why, and a double what is the 6th one. But I sort of frame it a bit more in a business context. Yeah, I've forgotten the original question now. About sort of pulling it from insights and data. So yeah, look at that data that you've got and ask those questions. Who is doing this? Why are they doing it? What's the reason they're doing it? And again, starting to see that you talked about patterns. If something is happening on a regular basis. Why is it happening? What's those patterns to do it? And then you can start to build those stories. So let me talk about another framework I use, which is what I call the 4 C's. And I will be completely honest, I stole this from one of the Marvel editors at Marvel Comics, because I also write comics. And this is one thing he teaches or talks about with writers at Marvel. And this is used with permission. I did ask him. But he has what he calls this 4C framework. When you turn in a script, it's like, if it doesn't hit this, it gets rejected. And that's like, every story needs a character. Okay? Every story needs a character who has a conflict. That character makes a choice, and then he deals with the consequences. All right? If you think about it, that's pretty much any story in entertainment media. Okay? How does that relate to business? Well, actually, I think it's a pretty much 100% match to what we do in a professional and business environment. Again, we're talking people to people. Who's the character? That's our customer. We have a customer. Okay. Conflict. He has a choice to make. He's either trying to do something, or he's got a problem to solve, or there's a process he needs to go through, but there's some sort of thing that he has to do. Okay. He makes a choice as to how he does that. Now, that choice may be that he uses our product or our service, or that choice may be is he doesn't. And then what's the consequences of him making that choice? And that's where we build our story. Who's our customer? What's the issues he's trying to solve? What are the choices in front of him? And what are the consequences and the context, again, my favorite word, of making those choices? And that could be working with some of the content that we send him, or it could be using our products. It could be not using our products. It could be choosing or not choosing a particular service. But I think that for me, that's another framework that when I'm looking at a piece of content that any of my clients have created, is does it, if this is a customer facing piece of content, does it resonate around that 4 C's framework as well? So what I like to do is sort of makes them a bit complex, but is apply those two frameworks. And if a piece of content or a story that we're putting out doesn't address those, is go back and say, why is it not addressing those? How can we actually improve it to make it address those?
I appreciate that perspective, and I'm thinking of the 4 C's now, and I'll credit Marvel. I'll make sure.
Yeah. Or you can say, or you can credit the content pool used with permission from Marvel. But,
yeah. Another question comes from Jamie, who is asking, I'm just getting started with exposure and education to become a compelling storyteller. So that's more of a
it's more like sharing.
Yeah.
It's a comment here, but it also relates to another question that Kai asked: how does storytelling? I'm sorry. This other one here. I don't have a lot of experience in storytelling. Any courses or books you recommend to start learning the skills? So how do we get better at this? If you learn, how do we get better at that?
Okay. The books I recommend, as I said earlier, about thinking outside your industry, are not business books in the traditional sense.
Right.
You're probably not going to find them in the business section in Barnes and Noble, or if Waterstones are in the UK or whatever. But I will tell you a couple of my absolute Bibles, and I normally have them in my office right by my desk. Is Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud. It is a graphic novel about the craft and structure of telling stories in a comics format. It has stuff in there about audience, it has stuff in there about timing, it has stuff in there about just the sheer mechanics of storytelling. The other one that I highly recommend is, and probably this is the main one, is Story. It's literally called Story, by Robert McKee. He is one of Hollywood's top screenwriters. He's the screenwriting guru in Hollywood. It applies to script writing and storytelling from a Hollywood point of view. But again, it's really good on how to actually weave a story. I will tell you, once you've read it, it will ruin every single movie you go to watch after you've read it, because you will watch a movie and you will go, I know exactly what they're doing. It's 26 minutes in, we're going to get the inciting point, we're going to get a plot turn here, we're going to get a plot turn here. Okay, this is going to happen in the last act. It would kill any movie that you watch from now on. But it is a really good insight how to building storytelling skills. And like I would say, you know, you don't necessarily have to go off and get a creative writing MFA, but read. You know, I also teach at some various conventions and writing conventions at some of the workshops for people who are like, you know, I want to write. How do I start? The best writers are voracious readers. Read and watch the world around you. As I said, think of yourself as a customer. You know, you're talking about customer experience storytelling. Think about your stories. Like I said, you know, what brands do you like? Why do you like them? What's the story around that? What's the story you would tell if I came to you and said, what's your favorite brand and why? And then apply that to what you're doing. So just keep your eyes open, read widely. If you really want some business books, there are some really good business books there around storytelling. There's one called Whoever Tells the Best Story Wins. And unfortunately, I'm not in my office, so I don't have it to hand, and I can't remember who the author is, but it's pretty good. Actually, Robert McKee, who I mentioned earlier, is actually not long ago did a book on content marketing storytelling. Joe Pulizzi and Robert Rose, who I mentioned earlier, have one called Killing Content Marketing, which is good. So there are good books out there that I would highly recommend. But just think about what you engage with in your daily life and think about it. If I had to tell a story about this, how would I do that? You know, who is the character? Is it me? What's my conflict? What was the choice I made? What's the consequence of that? And then like, okay, can I take that and apply it to my day job? So yeah.
That's a good framework to think about it. And as you were speaking there, I'm thinking to myself, if somebody said to me, you know, what's a customer experience story that you've experienced lately? And if I thought of myself, not just thinking about it, but actually writing it down as a practice, because a lot of times when you write things, I mean, write it down, a couple of paragraphs, and then sit back and read it and ask yourself those questions, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier about, you know, having a notebook when I started, you know, having a notebook and sitting in the mall or on the train or whatever, you know, crafting stories around individuals. I don't carry a notebook anymore, but I always have my phone with me. And I'm always taking notes. My wife hates going shopping with me because something happens and she's like, oh my God, there's another blog post. But, you know, just start thinking in those terms when you're out and about.
So we got one. Coming down to time here, but we have one more question that I wanted to get out here, which is Kai asks, how does storytelling in a business setup work?
Actually, I think I've been lucky enough to work for a couple of startups, and I will say, if you start thinking about storytelling right up front, it's a great way when you're actually setting up. I assume that's what they mean by business setup. I'm not quite sure what that question means, or whether you mean sort of functionally. But if you can build that into the company culture right from the early days, is a really great way to actually get a business up and running. If you can actually start thinking from an outside in, you know, what tends to happen is we all get enamored with the product. We're all, it's, you know, showing how great we are. We all get enamored of the products we create or the services we create. And it's, oh, look what we can do. Aren't we awesome? When it really should be about the individuals and the impact that your business has on the life of the people that you're serving, or the market you're serving. So if you can think in terms of that, look back and if you can build that culture in from originally. Now, if you're talking about how does it work functionally, it's, you know, I think there was a great, I'm trying to remember which company it was, but there was one of the big early social media, I think it was Zappos, the shoe company, where they basically had, you know, what department is responsible for customer experience, and the response from the CEO was every employee is responsible for customer experience. And again, it's if you can build it into the culture that and you don't silo off people that could actually benefit from talking to customers and benefit from going outside the organization. The worst thing that happens is, when you have the marketing department over here and the support people over here and the technical people over here, and they don't talk to each other. So how does storytelling work best in a business setup? It is really by just getting people within the organization to share stories, and then you start to build it into the culture.
Yeah. Well, Alan, this is such a fantastic topic, and I think I get the impression we could go on forever here.
Oh, yeah. I'm
so
sure.
We wanted, for the benefit of those that are on the session here, there's a QR code that's coming up on the screen here that they can use to rate this episode. This is just a little quick reaction to a couple of questions here about that. And of course, not to be on the lookout also for a survey coming your way later this week on how we can improve in general the episodes here. And so, Alan, I want to thank you. There was one question we did not get to, but I'll leave this one for you for everybody to think of. We're dealing with a very humanistic topic here in the midst of a AI epidemic, I call it, because everybody wants to use AI to solve every problem we have out there. I don't know how that works into the world of storytelling, other than could AI even help us, with a compelling story. But anyway, that's just something, you don't have to answer that question right now, but that's something to kind of take away and think about here. I will admit it, I use ChatGPT to do things for me, to rephrase things for me. I'd say a bunch of things, and I said, please reframe this in a more concise manner. And I do get some interesting things back that I then modify and use. So I guess the answer to that question is you can use it in that way. But anyway, next episode will be in August, Tuesday the 20th. I believe that's the one, third Tuesday of the month at this same time and same station. And my guest speaker then will be Brett Sharp, who will be talking with us about business impact through journey analytics. So I hope that is an interesting topic to you. Look forward to having more of you back here next month. Thank you very much for your time and attention today, and take care and have a great summer if you're in summer. And if you're down under in winter, have a great winter there too.
Take care. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Nick. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.